Hello, everybody. This is Sacolata with Architecture Talk Tongue. Today, I've got Amy Edwards with me. Really excited to be talking about marketing. She's a real expert in marketing for architects, servicing architecture firms, helping them um, develop brand strategy, marketing plans, but also message. And I really want to go deep into this conversation because we have been inviting marketing experts, but I think that Amy's approach is a little bit more structured around marketing, pure marketing. It's not comms. It's not, it's not your website. It's not LinkedIn. It's not social media. It's really going into the depth of how you structure your marketing and look at it from a bigger perspective. And I kind of wanted to devote this talk to that. So really excited for it. Welcome, Amy. Perhaps you introduce yourself to my audience and my listeners, and so we can hear a little bit more about your business as well and who you are as a person.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me on, Sarah. I really appreciate it. So I started Markedly about 4 years ago. And really it stemmed from working within architectural practices in Australia, and realizing that there was this gap in the market where small and medium practices really needed a lot of help with their marketing, and perhaps it just came from them not necessarily either having the money or the resources to have someone in-house within their business full-time doing marketing, or it didn't make sense to them. And so then I started Markedly, and originally, yes, it was started at small and medium practices, but now other bigger practices are starting to get involved. And over that time, a lot of it's been about marketing and strategy and direction. Like, a lot of them are just coming to us wanting to figure out what's the big picture, where are we heading in the next 3 to 5 years? And so we set strategy and marketing plans for them for that. But then we also execute things. So a big part of that is content marketing. So a lot of things across social media platforms, or planning out what actually you're going to do in terms of your content. How do you create like really deep messaging that isn't just surface level beautiful pictures, which is gorgeous, but how do you actually create a really in-depth brand that supports your marketing? And then just trying to tie that all in with your brand and how that's actually seen externally. But yes, that's us kind of in a nutshell. We work in Australia, but also we work with other companies around the world as well.
I love this. This is exciting. So tell me a little bit about what is a brand strategy. Let's just get right into it.
Yeah, jump me right into it. Well, brand strategy is really more about, I always think of it as a feeling. It's the personality of a brand. It's something that you connect to. It's not necessarily your logo. I think, there's a big misconception that branding is all about logo. And while that's a big element of it, it's actually not what people connect to. Often, you have this idea of what your brand is, but actually a lot of the time it's your audience who decides what your brand is. It's what their connection is to the brand. It's the feeling, it's the essence, it's the ideas you share. Yes, it's the projects and things that you share too, but it's more deep than that. And I think it's more based on the brands that are based on personality, I think have a greater connection with their audience.
I love this. So how do you get there actually? Like, what's the process of figuring out what your personality is? Because you're right with the logo side of things. And I think a lot of architects think that we have to blank page on online, and we need to put a logo in the right corner, on the left corner, sorry, left top corner, and then we just need to upload our work. And so here's our brand, like our projects and the way we render them and photograph them, and the logo, and that's it.
Yeah.
So we already established it's not about this, but like, how do you get into really understanding and developing that strong brand for yourself?
Yeah. I think, a lot of it comes down to, I think it really coming back to understanding who you are, but also, what is the image that you want to project out into the world? Um, what are those ideas that you're really passionate about? I think if you're a practice, you've got to do some deep diving here before you start really establishing a brand. And often if you're just starting if you're just starting a new practice going out on your own, it's like, don't jump into the logo straight up. Figure out who you are, like find yourself as a brand. What are those things that are really interesting to you? What are you passionate about? Is it Are you interested in climate change as part of architecture? Are you really interested in design detailing? Is it particular materials? Is it about innovation? Do you know what I mean? Like there's more
Yeah,
depth to that
absolutely.
than just oh well, I want my logo to be green, or I
Yeah,
want it to be in this type of font. Just forget about that first and come back to what is the feeling that you want to give people about your brand? What is it that really connects them to who you are? And a lot of that comes back down to the ideas that you want to share, I think. For a lot of brands that we've worked for, it's sometimes it even comes down to a process or a way of working. Like, it's within their business. Maybe it's, how they collaborate together as design teams. And, maybe that's something really unique that, other businesses aren't doing. And so you talk more about that, because I think then people are really, clients are really drawn to that, the process and the creative process of who you are. So develop a brand from that first, and then think about colors and fonts and all
exactly.
those things that most architects will think about first before they get into the depth of who they are as a person.
Absolutely, I agree with that, and that sounds amazing. So let's talk a little bit about marketing, because I think that
Mm.
branding and marketing, both of these words are sort of like always used together, and perhaps people are finding it hard to distinguish the difference. So,
Yeah,
what's the difference actually? Let's start
yeah.
there.
Yes. I think the three things that I think people get confused on is branding, marketing, and advertising. And actually, if I add another one, business development. There's all of them. But I think I like to think of, brand is the personality of who you are, and marketing is how you execute it. But marketing, generally, when I explain it to people, I think of it more of as an umbrella term. It's marketing encompasses a lot of different things. It's the actions that you're taking then to get your brand out there, right? And to generate leads. So marketing can be a number of things. It could be your website, but it could be business development, could be networking, advertising, social media, all of those things. Maybe it's events. All of those things come together to present ways for people to find you and for you to execute your vision and execute your marketing to be able to draw people in so that you can create leads and do some great work.
That sounds great. So, basically, moving forward with marketing, what is important for architects to think about when they're sitting down to consider what do we do this year for our marketing?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of things. I think, particularly for the next, have a think about the next 3 to 5 years. So try and think a little bit further beyond just the immediate year, because a year goes so fast. Like, you know what it's like? It's just you're in January, and the next thing you know, you're in January next year and you haven't done anything. So generally, I try to get people to project themselves 3 to 5 years ahead. And the reason I do that is because sometimes, where you want to be in 5 years from now is different from where you currently are, right? And it's an aspiration of where you want to get to. But if you start marketing yourself at that aspiration level, so where you want to be seen in 5 years' time, you're much more likely to get there quickly than if you try and set these smaller goals, for a year or maybe 2 years or 18 months or something. It's harder to create traction. But if you project yourself forward to, say, 3 to 5 years of where you want to be, and then you start executing your marketing based on that vision, I would then set a plan for the next 12 months for that. I think the other thing to consider is that you've got to go back and measure what's working and adapt. And I know you and I were talking about that a little bit earlier about adapting, but it's so important. And particularly in the last 2 years, the importance of adapting has just been highlighted so greatly. So if something's not working within sort of 3 to 6 months, then you've got to stop and look and understand what could we do better? What can we change, and actually take that action to make it happen.
I love this. I really love this. You're actually giving me so many tips. I'm like, oh,
That's good.
'cause
Good.
I shared it with you actually before that I started a new year with making a marketing plan for myself. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's like it started with a big vision of like where I want to go. But so many interesting things that you're sharing. So I'm like, I'm gonna go back to this.
Oh, good. I'm pleased. I'm pleased.
So okay, let's just say we have that vision and we have that marketing plan. Now, how do we execute it? Let's just say on like weekly or monthly basis, because I guess that's really what then translates into what we directly post on social media. And
Yeah.
so, and this is the marketing plan being executed into our everyday communication strategy with our audience. So, how do we find ourselves there? Like,
Mm.
to take the big vision and implement it into daily comms.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's the hardest part, and that's the hardest part for everyone. It's a hard part for me. It's probably a hard part for you. It's everyone in business. That's the hardest bit because it's every day in, day out. You're trying to push that needle forward. My advice always is, have those big visions. You know what you want to achieve for the year, but I think you have to break it down into smaller steps and things that can be achieved on a small scale, so that on a weekly, fortnightly, monthly basis, you're chipping away at it. You're taking little bits of little steps towards those goals. I think the other thing is, don't set the bar way too high. Like, I think that's generally what I see with a lot of practices is that um, they have these huge goals and it's actually unattainable. And then what happens is they get 6 months into their marketing year and they haven't achieved anything, and then they just give up because they're just like, well, it's too hard. um, I would much rather see you do some smaller things and make some smaller achievements, and then build on that. Do you know what I mean? And so then you get the confidence to do more. It's like the more little small wins you have, the more, I guess, risks or greater steps that you want to take towards those goals. Probably no different to exercising. Do you know what I mean? You do small bits, and then over time you actually have done a lot. But I think, yeah, the main thing is take small steps towards your goals if possible. Plan out your month if you can, of what you're going to achieve for the month. But even if you've got a small team, find someone else who can hold you accountable. So that means meeting either once a month or at the least once a quarter. And once a quarter is great because it means that you've got enough time. You've got 3 months, whatever, to come together and think, okay, we're actually going to achieve some pretty good things here. But it also means you can break down some of those goals into some really achievable steps.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I love this. I thought you disappeared for a moment because I don't know if it was my internet or yours, but I was like, oh, did we lose the broadcast?
Did it cut
No.
out for a bit? Sorry. Might be mine.
No, it's the web. No, so that makes a lot of sense. Small achievable goals. And then how do we really approach that from a perspective of, let's just say we're working on a project, perhaps we haven't just this month finished an amazing architecture piece. So there isn't really anything to photograph. And gosh, how long does that take anyway? Like just
Yeah.
even bring everything to completion because, the process of building and designing might take anywhere between 2 to 5 years or even longer. And then even when the building is finished, just to be able to come in and photograph it, you need to wait for interiors to be done and, everything is staged and arranged perfectly and hire a beautifully, a well-talented photographer so basically the process is just so long that, if we just waited for the finished bit to be published on Instagram, we probably would be posting one image every 2 years. So
exactly.
So how do we manage our content?
Yeah.
In reality, the nitty gritty truth is that we're just sitting there and drafting and writing and maybe drafting and working on the 3D and managing the team and going to construction sites and visiting that and probably finding very little time to communicate what really is going on. How do you manage that in an architecture firm?
Yeah. I think that, you've highlighted something really, really important, but also that happens across, I think it's all architectural practices, no matter where they are in the world, is that they're waiting for something perfect to photograph, for it to be perfectly, beautiful and polished so that they can put it out into the world. But there's this, like you said, there's this huge amount of time, sometimes it's 2 or 3 years, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's longer before that project's even finished, So how do you talk about a project when it's not finished? And I think there's so much, like you'll say, oh, well, it's like we're only drafting or we're only doing site visits. But actually, that's the stuff that your audience wants to see. Like, they want to see that creative process. They want to see, when you first got an idea, and you as either an individual or as a team, you're working together and nutting out problems, like you're problem solving through design, and being creative with, maybe you're doing some amazing facade design, and you're testing out ideas digitally, but then you're also doing it in a physical form, like you're trying to test it out. Like, I would be getting as much of that and capturing as much of that process as possible and sharing that with your audience. And I think there's also just so many stories that you can capture just within one project, right? It isn't just about the end product. There is, like, the client brief, and how did you develop that further into a creative design ideas, and how did you plan it out? How was space planning? What were the challenges, and how did you overcome those? What is it like going out to site? But there's a lot more depth to a story, and I think the biggest part is uncovering what are all of those stories about a project that then you can develop content about, and whether that's maybe that's filming you sketching, or photographs of the sketches, or maybe it's filming on site, or there's lots and lots of different things. But there's also articles you can write about your project too, and the challenges that you've overcome that might be relatable for other people too. So I think the big part is trying not to focus on the end product. While that's important, I think that's beautiful and it's great to share, and when you've got that content, it's wonderful. But there's all this other time beforehand that can often be wasted or lost because you're just thinking that it's not important, but actually it's what people are interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also, like, it's super important to talk about in the first place, like the design process that you're implementing. I'm very fascinated by architects that talk about the materials they're using, or how they're building like blends into the site because of the basically culturally informed architecture styles that they will put in, or why they chose to do this for an interior or something else. I mean, I find that a lot of times with like residential projects, you can go very deep into this, especially if you have a very specific design style, or you're informing your design by research into sustainability or technology. There's a lot of stories to tell around that, where your actual inspiration comes from, who you're looking up, like what is the reason behind you chose that specific design over another. And there's a lot of stories to tell around this, like with ecological approaches, and also I think talking about how you save money through your projects. I mean, I certainly have had really interesting speakers at Disrupt that talked about, we did this really in-depth research into technology, and invited also some external experts that were really good at that topic to see how we can decrease the amount of steel, but still like stick to a design of doing this like suspended crazy big roof, I don't know, dome building, whatever design, but like using BIM technology and testing materials to reduce carbon footprint and reduce the amount of a certain type of material. And that at the end saved, I don't know, $1 million in construction. And that's just such an interesting statistic, but also seeing that passion come through numbers and telling a story of like how we got there. Because at the very finished piece, like final process, you kind of, the image doesn't do justice to the journey and the decision making.
Absolutely.
Way.
Yeah, and I think like there's so much there's so much talk in the industry that the general public or other people don't value design. And you've probably heard that a lot as well. It's like, oh, people don't value our design work, and we work so hard and we work so many hours. And well, you're going to have to tell people what you do, because so many people, people who've never worked with an architect before, they don't understand. They don't understand that, you're using BIM technology, and actually you're collaborating with a lot of different people to solve problems, and you're testing ideas. There's a creativity, but there's also a lot of technical elements too that are really important. So how do you capture all of that, and how do you tell people about that? Because when you're telling people about that, then they can actually connect with that, and it's the stories that you tell that people connect with, and then that's what's going to help them value design as well. Do you know what I mean? And that
Absolutely.
then as a whole does really well for the industry.
Yeah, it does. And you just reminded me something that inspired me so deeply. Actually, at the first Disrupt, we invited Soneta and
Yeah,
Jette Catherine Hope, who she's a business development director for Soneta, and she was talking about how, and I think that they have a very strong brand and a really
they do.
well-defined brand. They've done so well on that front. I mean, it's just incredible looking at it from a business perspective. How much
Yeah,
just does that studio to have such a strong message? And in her presentation, she spoke that for them the most important is people, and they took that aspect of people through their design. So of course you can see in their designs how everything is about people and the experience of people. Like even, okay, can this facade then turn into this, I don't know, great walkway around the building? I don't know,
yeah,
being a massive public space, and that sort of idea of like integrating places and experiences into the actual design of a building itself is what they do with the design. But then that same notion carried through how they occupy their time together as team members in the
yeah,
studio. They're like doing things like sports together and eating together. They designed their headquarters and like their offices around basically spending time with each other. And so that element of people, you can see that in their office arrangements and how they interact, by eating together, having someone who cooks for them and sitting together at these big tables and all that. So that brand message carried through to how every team member experiences the office, and then also how that then carries through into their design. And like being able to present
so
that
cool.
notion was so clear and clearly present in every example, through their onboarding to like how they work together, to working with other partners, to delivering the projects, to delivering the design, that it's a really great example of like how the brand carries through marketing, but also develops like a style that one can
Yeah,
associate with, and carries that really strong message, and that's what's important, I think. So
yeah,
that's something for yourself, whoever you are, and like kind of really leading with that, making that your core message. It can translate to the big brand message, but it can also translate into, hey, we care about it, so therefore today we, I don't know, gathered together and did this research or had that
yeah,
discussion, contributed in that way to the environment, to lowering carbon, or to developing our BIM technology, whatever the story is within the office. And so that really carries through. You actually studied architecture. You're an architect now doing
oh,
marketing.
and well, I'm not actually. So I didn't study architecture, but I worked within architecture practice.
Oh, you
So
worked within architecture
yeah,
practice. Okay, so tell
yeah,
me about that journey of yours,
yeah,
because I wanted to ask you a little bit about your personal experience.
yeah,
Actually realizing that you want to do this, which is marketing
yeah.
for architects.
Of course. Well, I think, I started off, really what I started off with was in like fashion retail marketing, and I loved it. And I loved fashion design. And I thought that was just like where I was going to be. That was like, it's all I wanted to do. And I think, I got to a really excellent role within marketing, like in a national marketing manager role. But I found that it just wasn't what I wanted. I found it wasn't where I wanted to be. And I had a friend of mine who was an interior designer for a local practice, and she said, "Oh, actually, they're looking for someone. Would you be interested?" And I was like, "Of course, I would." I'd always loved architecture and design, and that was kind of what I'd always had a lot of interest in. I had come from a really creative family, and um, like of my brother's an artist, and my grandmother was an artist in her own kind of way, and my mum was really creative. So I was like, okay, well, let's give it a go. And I went in there, and I just I kind of just found my people, and I just fell in love with it, and I really felt that. I could really help them. There's things I understood design, and I understood the creativity of it and what they were trying to achieve. But I could also see from the other side, like the business side and the marketing side, that they needed that help. Um, And I think, what was really great is I loved just building a brand, particularly with this practice that I started with. They had really big visions, and, they start off as this really boutique brand, and now they're actually quite a big practice in Brisbane, and they do great, massive projects and public projects and across a lot of diverse sectors. And it was really cool to be a part of that journey. But also I don't know what it is about creativity and design and architecture that I love, but I think it's just, I'm drawn to the idea that you're crafting something, something that's from your imagination and something that you've thought of, but also that you're, using these really imaginative and but also technically brilliant problem solving skills to be able to make something that's going to have this legacy within our cities and in our towns around the world.
I love this. This is great. Actually, when I was curating the first Disrupt, I was asking a lot of the speakers that I invited, what else do you think would be really interesting to cover for the stage? And I heard quite a few of them. And mind you, those are people that are like running the practices. They said, we're always curious to see how the fashion industry does it, that they are actually able to develop a brand that like completely outlives their creator, and somewhat years later they're still developing projects that are really in line with that brand. And I think that from the business perspective, that is incredibly a good example of like basically how fashion houses execute that. And practically almost every single one of them has their own style and is very truthful to that style. So therefore the brand always kind of remains intact throughout, having to create collections and such also speed of production of products and designs. And also people changing within the practice. You don't still have Chanel running Chanel.
Exactly.
Yet you go to the Chanel studio, like office, shop, and the designs are very intact with like the original Chanel's, right? So like, how do you do that even though the team changes? And it was so interesting. I think the fact that you're working right now for architects and carrying through that sort of experience from fashion is really valuable for our industry, honestly. And I think it's just an incredible asset to have in you to be able to reach out and like and work actually with your expertise, because the biggest offices are asking those questions, like how can we learn marketing and branding for fashion houses?
Well, and I think they are excellent at, they're excellent at executing a brand. Like, you're so right. Like, their stuff changes all the time. They might have like with architect studios, you might then have a star architect, like someone who's like the main player, but they always move on. So, I think there's a lot to be learned from fashion houses and how they do that. How do they maintain a brand and a feeling so that, no matter where you go in the world within one of their stores, there's that same feeling, like you still understand the personality of the brand, right?
Exactly.
I think the other thing to learn from fashion houses is their speed. I think they're pretty amazing. I think that was one of the reasons probably why I left as well. But the pace that they go at is, it's phenomenal. They're putting out collections every quarter pretty much, or every season, plus more. And I think there's a lot with fashion houses that they are adapting, and they have always adapted. As long as you look back, they know how to adapt quickly. And I think that's probably a shortfall for architects and designers, really, is that they can get stuck. And I think and see it as a failure if something doesn't work, but rather than just embracing that failure and having a lessons learned and adapting what you do to then make it successful and turn it around a bit. So I think, yes, absolutely. It's interesting to hear that other bigger practices are looking to the fashion industry. I think that's really important.
Yeah, because like when I launched Disrupted, like kind of was the first time for a lot of those practices to have an opportunity to look at how they do things, because that's kind of what I always ask at the beginning. And it's really interesting when someone takes it to heart and they're like actually go back and they revisit that question, like how do we really do things and what else could we learn? And given the fact that I invite all these incredible practices, they want to come and learn from themselves. And I saw this really
That's
in the
so cool.
physical event the most because first you have this really famous architects come together. When we did it in Athens, for example, and they all sit side by side, and it's like, okay, what is this going to be? Are we going to be like trading secrets, like trade secrets? What is this? Like, this is uncomfortable.
What's it going to be?
And the next thing you know, it's like all the speakers are sitting in the front and they're like raising their hands and asking questions. And next thing
So
you know,
cool.
one learns from another. And I think that what happens there is even more powerful than like the questions from the audience that are also great. And of course, the audience is really good quality too. But like, I think that you realize that with every single event that is getting organized, people are actually coming in and contributing a lot. There's a lot of thought to it. We're like producing articles and interviews, and each speaker is preparing their own presentation. So they're really thinking about what is it that we're doing, and what is our business message. And when I asked them, what else would you like to learn from this fashion thing has, been put forward a lot of times. And I love it because people in leadership roles already will ask very specific business questions. Like, they're not in the basics. They will be elevated and they'll be asking very intelligent questions about business. And it's like, how does another creative industry do it so successful, and we're still figuring that out for ourselves? And yet, I mean, a great example in our industry of a person that made the right thing certainly is Norman Foster. Like, I think
Yeah.
yeah, he has established something like all the big fashion houses did, but big also. And there's
Yeah.
certainly quite a few names, but it's like one to be really well recognized and famous in the architecture industry, and another to be globally recognized, like really
Yeah.
globally recognized as great architects, not just by people that love architecture, but like I
Yeah.
think
But
there are
like by
certain
just regular people.
Exactly. There are certain names out there that are like, okay, I know that guy. And what makes them unique, look at the very basics of how they marketed themselves, like their communication and what they did to get
Yeah.
out there and be recognized. That is so fascinating, honestly. Like with
Yeah.
Big and his story specifically, writing the book, which like when he didn't have many projects to show, he did a comic. Like, isn't that
Yeah.
cool? Like it's illustrated and it has all the message, and it spoke strongly to his principles and what he wanted to create. And I thought it was a very clever way to get out there, before having a full website to show off, like, oh, we do all these projects, right? It's like, how do you actually communicate what you want to do before you have it?
Yeah, and I think it's just like making the most of the skills that you have or the resources that you have. Like you don't have to have like the latest and greatest website. Like you don't have to have all of that stuff, but you do have to have enthusiasm and drive and be really passionate about what you're doing, and finding ways to communicate that differently will actually, it helps you be seen and it helps you be heard, because people connect with that. They connect with the stories, or they connect with something that's hand drawn, or whatever it is. But I think it's just also just don't be afraid to start. Like I think so much in marketing is as a lot of there's a lot of thinking about it and thinking about what it should be and what could we be, but actually just get on with it and just make a start. I think that was one of the first posts I did when I first started the business. Like I think I just had just start, because you do like and if you make mistakes, like it doesn't matter. Like
Yeah.
move on and just keep moving, I think is the main thing. Don't get stuck.
Mm-hmm. For sort of wrapping it up, I have one last
Yeah.
question.
Oh, of
I
course.
think that a lot of architecture firms at some point they grow and they're like, okay, we have to invest maybe in like internal marketing, and so they do
Mhm.
that. But I'm also really pro hiring experts to like outsource your work too, and I think that
Yeah.
that's also a great model. Which one do you think, and like, which one do you stand for, being an expert and actually working with firms? Do you still see architects actually having their own in-house marketing teams and still coming for advice and not having everything figured out? I think that can be more common than we think, we
Mm.
expect. So yeah, so what was your experience, and what can you say to that?
Yeah, I think like I'm always an advocate for a marketing person or a communications person within your practice. If you can resource that, and you've got you've got the time and the money to dedicate to that, I think that's brilliant, because they're a part of your business. They see it firsthand, day in, day out. They understand what's going on. But also, like, sometimes you might need external help, and that's okay. And but if you do get external help, I think the main thing to consider is it's not a set and forget. Like, if you're still accountable, like this, you still have to bring things to the table. Just because you outsource it doesn't mean you don't have to do anything, right?
Yeah.
So a big part of, if you're outsourcing any marketing or anything, actually, any kind of service, there's still a level of responsibility, and there's still a level of engagement or effort that you've got to put in as a team. You've sort of got to bring 50%, and they've got to bring 50% to make it really work. But yeah, I'm always still an advocate for in studio marketing. If you can afford it, excellent. If not, then hire other people externally who can help you do that. And whether that's, for some people that might mean they have someone externally come in who's similar to us, who might come and do marketing strategy and development, and that gives them a plan to start with, and then they've got people within their studio who can execute that. And then sometimes that's all they need, right? Other times they might need help with content, and so then they might come to people like us to help them do their content every month and plan it all out and write all of the posts that they're going to do in their articles and schedule it all ahead of time. But then they might just get someone in like us who can teach them how to do that within their studio. So I think you've got to think about, what have you got time for? What have you got money for within your practice? The other thing is how important is it to you? And I think if you don't value it, don't have someone in your studio, maybe, I don't know. But I think it's something that you have to value as part of business. Marketing is a part of business, whether you like it or not. And it's the only way that's going to help you kind of move forward and grow as a practice.
I love that. And I think also, like, we shouldn't be thinking about marketing as something that we do once and continue the same thing. Like, with a lot of businesses, it's kind of like campaigning around a certain product or campaigning around a goal you want to achieve. And I think I really want to, like, kind of bring it home that if you decided that you want to branch out or expand a little bit to new clientele, and you want to invite new projects, perhaps you do want to market for that in order to attract it. That's extremely important. So ideally, you would create a campaign as to how you want to get there and start promoting a little bit more, like putting out a little bit more articles or a little bit more content around that particular thing that you want to attract, so that it positions you as an expert and an eloquent, adequate person, to execute that work. And that comes first, before you start talking to the right people that can potentially be the client to then get to there. And so I would really advocate for sometimes getting external opinion and external eyes onto what you're trying to do. So even though you have an inside team with certain marketing objectives or some type of projects or campaigns, it's really cool to bring an external person. And sometimes it's better to also work with people that have that broader perspective, or on being able to jump in to one studio, execute a project, and exit. It's like no attachment that really, really helps with that. So that's also why I think being able to, like, dip in and out on external consultancy is a really great idea, because it can keep things fresh for you, and you don't just not on that wheel of, like, repeating the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, it's very objective. There's no emotion in that. There's no internal politics that you're dealing with. You're just coming in, and I think as an external consultant, you come in and you can just take a really fresh look, an objective look at, like, what's actually happening in the room, and make some key decisions that help them actually move forward. Because it's, like I said, with other things, it happens in any kind of business, but also particularly in creative business, is that people can get really stuck. Like, how do you then keep things moving? I think the other thing that, many architects find hard, or designers find hard, is that, they work on projects where you start something, you do it and you finish it. But marketing's not really like that. I mean, yes, we do have campaigns, and yes, we do have projects that we work on, but it's kind of ever evolving. It kind of never ends. And I think for a lot of architects and designers, they find that a little bit hard to grasp. But it's things always evolving and changing, and it sort of doesn't end. but that's not a bad thing. I think that actually just speaks to opportunity of how you can position yourself. So actually you're getting the work that you really want. It's just exactly like you said, position yourself as the expert in an area. If you want to do that type of work, make yourself an expert in it. And
Yeah.
then people will contact you because of that. Not because you're going to you go and set up a meeting with someone, often they're like, well, how are you the expert? I don't understand.
Yeah.
But actually if you're doing that content, then that proves your point, right? So yeah, I'm 100% on board with what you're saying with that. Exactly.
Thank you so much for joining me for this podcast.
Okay.
I really loved hosting you. It was such a great chat about marketing and everything.
Thanks.
So where do people find you if they want to reach out?
Sure. So you can find me on Instagram at markedly, marked.ly. You can also find me on LinkedIn, so Amy Edwards, or through Markedly on LinkedIn, or you can find us on our website, which is themarkedly.com.au.
Excellent. Amazing. Thank you so much,
And
Amy. It was a pleasure.
thank you so much. I enjoyed it so much. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Bye. Take care.